Boogie House, Chapter 10, read by the author. I was 6 years old in 1982, the year my mother died in childbirth. She did so having her second child by a man who was most definitely not my father, and my mind hung on to that time period like a necessary password or something. In the days after the funeral, he became a drunken, possessed lunatic, boozing himself into an erratic stupor and destroying anything he could get his hands on. Very often, I hid from him in my room, but it didn't always work. One night, after he was pretty well broadsided by a pint of bourbon, I sat on the living room couch, unwilling to try and turn on the television, when a knock came at the door. Several knocks, actually, each more fierce than the last. I used one of the bigger pillows to shield myself, hoping that he might be fooled into believing I really, truly wasn't there. My father opened up, demanding to know what the hell someone would possibly want at this hour, and then the man responded with 3 little words. We got him. I heard the roar of an engine moments later, and my father, standing in the doorway, turned to me. His eyes were so sunken they seemed to disappear in his cheeks. "You gonna come with me, little man," he said, swaying on his feet. "We gonna take a little ride." I only had a single spare tire, so I didn't bother replacing any of the deflated ones the next morning. I would easily run the remaining ones flat off the rim before I reached a place to get them fixed. Goddamn cars, I thought, would be the death of me. I'd put myself in this position. I had walked right up to Leland Brookmeyer's house and tried to intimidate him into doing something stupid. My first mistake. Leland Brookmeyer was too slick, too greased up by money, to do something obvious. After a quick lunch of cube steak and mashed potatoes, I called a junkyard dog named Jarvis Garvey and organized the rental of one of his cars, offering him an extra $20 if he would come and pick me up. "The hell you need a car that bad for?" he asked, half-jokingly, saying he hoped he wasn't being timed. He said, "I got to put a battery and a couple gallons of gas in the junker before I bring it to you." I told him that was fine, and we hung up. Garvey was an old cracker, but he was trustworthy. I rinsed my dishes and locked up the house real tight, closing all the windows and doors and latching things that probably hadn't been fastened in years. I waited outside, lowering the rusty tailgate on my truck and sweeping the pollen off with one hand before sitting down. The sun beamed through the sparse clouds. I noticed the weather seemed to be getting better even as my circumstances got worse. A police cruiser turned into my drive not 30 seconds later. Even through the windshield, the 2 men looked pissed. I continued to swing my feet non-committally and stare off into the distance until they got right up on me. "Rolson," the man on my left said. His name was Ricky Walton, and no work on his part could hide his contempt. I looked at the other man and said, "Hats off to Roy Harper, how you doing?" Ricky glared at him. "Roy?" Owen Harper said, "Led Zeppelin." Owen stood 6'3", sandy-haired and always smiling, one of the few tolerable men on the force. He always gave off a genuine vibe. There was nothing conspicuously cynical about him. He was missing 2 fingers on his right hand from trying to save a girl from being hacked to death by her drug-addled mother. He eventually got the meat cleaver away and cuffed her with the good hand. Everybody thought he deserved a special place in heaven for that one, and I agreed. Ricky cleared his throat, but said nothing. "What can I do for you boys?" I asked. "We're getting some complaints, Rolson," Owen said. I tried to hide my amusement. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "You're trudging around in muck and you're all by yourself. Keep on doing it and you're going to get caught so that nobody around here will be able to help." I looked down at my boots. "Guess they are getting a bit dirty," I said. Ricky groaned. "I don't mean literally, Rolson." "Dang it." When you put it that way, it sounds threatening." "It's just the way it is, man," Ricky said. Owen put his hands on his hips and blew out a long breath. "Just stop bothering Leland Brookmeyer, Roll," he said. "He ain't done nothing to you, so just leave him alone." I asked him a few questions. Nothing illegal in that. I even went up to the door and knocked like a good citizen. If Willa Jean Graham and the other Jehovah's Witnesses can do it, so can I." They both looked exasperated. "You don't want him lashing out at you. It's the last thing you want because he's got a long reach and he can fuck you without touching you directly." "Like now," I said. "This is just a courtesy. Leland's done plenty for this city and for the police force. You saw it with your own eyes. He's an asshole and a liar. And even if he has nothing to do with this, it won't do him any harm to get a stick in the ribs, now will it?" I felt a shockwave pass over us. They kept calm, outwardly, but I didn't suspect they'd be doing me any favors down the road. Owen said, "Why don't you just let this go? Let us do our jobs. If you have anything to contribute, call me up. I'll be the first to help you out." "You'll protect him. You've sold yourselves off, all of you." "He's always got people gunning for him. He deserves a certain level of protection." I spat on the ground between Ricky's feet. "Are you cops or bodyguards, fellas?" I said, "because Leland's already got one of those." "Let me tell you something, you drunk son bitch." "No, don't," I said. "It ain't got to be a bribe to be a loyalty oath. The kind of back scratching that you do, that we all did, I suppose, isn't illegal, but it isn't right either. If he even had a moment's involvement in Laveau's murder, he deserves what he gets. That's all." I got up and went around to the front of the truck. I popped the hood latch and pretended to look at the engine until they went away. I thought they may try to arrest me, to bring me in on some half-assed charge, but they didn't. They piled into the cruiser and drove away, spinning ruts into the dirt of the driveway. Jarvis pulled into my drive with 30 seconds to spare. He was a bent old man in overalls and a worn Stetson, and though he could barely see over the steering wheel, he drove like a man chasing somebody down. The tires on the maroon Oldsmobile kicked up clouds of dust as he slammed to a stop, just feet from my truck. I saw him smile through the windshield. "I thought I was going to have to wait a while," I said. "Had to see for myself if you were bullshitting me about the money," he said, laughing. "Can't turn down a bet like that, my damn pocket gets itchy." On the drive back to town, Jarvis said, "Truck of yours sitting in the driveway looked fine to me." "You've got a whole yard full. I figured taking one wouldn't matter." No, you know what I mean. That truck looked like it runs at least as good as this heat." His eyes were smiling and yet not joking. To get them off me and back on the road, where they desperately needed to be, I said, "Busted a tire. I got a flat and need something to ride around in until I get it fixed." "I have some old tires, though, and could get them on in a few minutes, no problem." "That ain't no reason to be borrowing no car." "And it would be better if I had a car that wasn't so tied to me, I guess." He banked a curve, almost losing traction on a sand deposit on the road, and said, "Figures. I heard about you finding that Laveau boy." Word travels fast. Like lightning. You're not a cop anymore. You go playing Sam Spade in this car and end up wrapping it around a tree, you and me's going to have some words. You ain't Humphrey Bogart. And you ain't Peter Lorre, but you're twice as ratty. He chuckled. "I don't want to see the car on the news, abandoned on the side of the road, driver missing, blood everywhere. Murder breeds murder. I tell you what, that boy's mother might be blessed to have you looking for a killer, but you don't want somebody like Ronald Bullen looking for you." "You know something I don't?" "Something in that man's eyes is like looking straight into an empty coffin. Him and his brother." "His brother?" "H.W. I seen H.W. and Ronald riding around last week like a couple of wolves wearing wool. H.W., he must have been run out of whatever town he was in last." Apparently, Ron's younger brother had moved away 15 years ago to go work construction or some other thing. Rumor was, for a while, that he went to go do underwater welding. Work like that fit him, and being gone so long made him a kind of ghost. People talked about him in the past tense, and it seemed like the world was better off that way. Jarvis pulled into his immense junkyard and got out. "Car's yours till you return it. Take good care of it, and yourself, too." I switched seats and worked the transmission into reverse. Jarvis squinted at me as if he had something to say. "What is it?" I asked. He smiled, looked down, began to say something, then didn't. Finally, he glanced at me again and said, "I knew your daddy some." All I could do was nod. "He wasn't worth much, but he loved you and your mama. That don't excuse what he did, but people get tied to things they don't necessarily find right, and they forget about what's important. He certainly did, but he wasn't a monster." He paused, trying to find better words. They must have been lost because he became flustered. "Hell, I don't know. He was a jealous drunk, and that firing didn't mix well with the liquor, I guess." He stood there for another minute, then finished by saying, "Well, shit." With that, he turned and disappeared into the rows of cars, walking like a man who had given up long ago.